The day I received the HOA's demand letter felt like a joke, one of those passive-aggressive notes from someone with too much free time and not enough perspective, but the further I read, the more my amusement shifted into something darker, something personal. Remove your boat from the lake immediately, or face escalating fines, it read. Printed on heavy cardstock and signed with looping cursive by Karen L. Edmonds, President of the Lakeside Ridge Homeowners Association. A red exclamation point was stamped at the bottom, probably meant to scare me into submission. What Karen didn't know and what I hadn't shared with anyone in the neighborhood is that I didn't just own the boat. I owned the lake, and the deed sitting in my fireproof safe proved it. The irony was too good, almost poetic. The same HOA that had tried for years to box everyone into their little mold-dictating grass height, siding colors, mailbox types, even which holidays could be displayed, was about to discover that their biggest power play was built on a foundation they didn't even own. My name is Thomas Bell, and I moved to Lakeside Ridge 3 years ago after inheriting a lakeside property from my late uncle. The house itself was rustic, but solid cedar beams, stone fireplace, wraparound porch, but what truly mattered was the parcel it sat on, 24 acres, including full deeded rights to the lakefront and the water body itself, all recorded in the original 1947 land grant before Lakeside Ridge was even conceived. At the time, I didn't think much of it. My uncle had always told me, "This lake is ours, kid," but I figured it was just sentimental pride, till I opened that envelope and realized the HOA had no idea. The boat in question wasn't even an eyesore. It was a vintage 1973 Chris Craft I had painstakingly restored with my own hands, docked neatly at the old pier my uncle built. I used it maybe twice a week to fish or relax in the middle of the lake, well away from any of the HOA homes that sat on the far side. No noise, no pollution, just a man in his lake. But for Karen, my mere existence outside her control was an offense, and this letter made it clear she intended to flex every ounce of her HOA authority to remind me who she thought was in charge. She had no idea what she was stepping into. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I drove down to the county clerk's office and requested certified copies of the lake deed and associated survey maps. The clerk, a kindly old woman with thick glasses, took one look and said, "Oh wow, they never rezoned this into the HOA. You're sitting on the gold seat, honey." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I was finally beginning to understand the scope of what I owned. It wasn't just the lake. It was the land on the north end, where the HOA clubhouse and the community dock had been built decades ago without a single recorded easement. They had built their empire on someone else's property. Mine, I kept quiet, watching as Karen escalated her tactics. A second letter arrived, this time citing Article 12, Section B of the HOA bylaws, no unauthorized recreational vessels permitted on community-owned waters. She included a photo of my boat, taken from across the lake, circled in red like it was evidence in a criminal investigation. Then came the fine, $100 a day, starting immediately. I still didn't respond. Instead, I waited until the end of the week and mailed her a formal letter, notarized and concise. You are hereby informed that the property referred to as Lakeside Ridge Lake, including its banks and associated facilities, is deeded privately, and not under the jurisdiction of your homeowners association. Continued harassment will result in legal action. I attached the deed. 2 days later, Karen showed up on my dock in a golf cart, flanked by 2 board members and holding a clipboard like it was a sword. "This is private property," I said, calmly as I stepped outside. "You're trespassing." She ignored me and started reading from her clipboard, something about compliance, safety regulations, and HOA enforcement. I waited until she finished, then handed her a copy of the land survey and the deed. Her lips tightened as she read. Her hands trembled just slightly. This can't be right," she muttered. "That clubhouse is HOA property. That dock has been there since the 80s. I shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Your HOA never secured an easement. My uncle never sold the land, that dock, that clubhouse. They're on my land, and so is this lake." The board members whispered to each other, their confidence draining with every passing second. Karen, however, wasn't done. Her eyes narrowed. "We'll take this to the county." I smiled. "Please do." She did. Over the next 2 weeks, I received inquiries from the zoning office, the registrar, even the HOA's attorney. Each time I provided the same documentation. And each time, the answer came back the same. The land and the lake were privately owned, and the HOA had no legal standing to enforce any rules on my property. The best part? When I checked the HOA's public tax filings, I discovered that they'd been claiming ownership of the lake and clubhouse in official reports for years, meaning Corinne's empire wasn't just overstepping it, was committing fraud. Still, I didn't go nuclear yet. I waited, giving them time to dig deeper. And sure enough, Karen couldn't help herself. She began spreading rumors telling neighbors I was lying, that the documents were fake, that I was trying to steal community land for personal gain. She even held a board meeting where she urged residents to file complaints with the sheriff about the illegal squatter boat. That's when I knew it was time. I called Angela, a sharp real estate attorney and old college friend, and within 72 hours, we filed a cease and desist order against the HOA in a civil suit demanding the immediate removal of all HOA structures from my land, including the clubhouse, the dock, the walking trail, and 2 small utility sheds tucked behind the tennis court. I wasn't bluffing. I had every document, every legal precedent, and every historical record needed to win. But more importantly, I had patience and Karen had pride. Her pride was about to become her downfall. If you've ever dealt with an HOA tyrant, if you felt powerless against someone hiding behind bylaws and clipboards, then this story is for you. Make sure you subscribe to Sham Stories right now, because what happens next will blow your mind and finally give you the satisfaction of seeing a Karen fall by her own rules. The lawsuit hit the HOA like a brick through stained glass, shattering their illusion of invincibility in one swift motion. Karen responded just as I expected by doubling down. The very next day, every community bulletin board was plastered, with a printed statement from the HOA board declaring my claim to the lake and surrounding land as under legal dispute, and warning residents to avoid all contact with unauthorized parties pending review. I was now the villain in there. Little suburban opera, painted as a dangerous outsider, threatening their utopia. Some neighbors stopped waving at me. Few even crossed the street when I walked Max past their homes. But others, quiet, observant, tired of Karen's regime, started reaching out. One woman, Deb, left a pie on my porch with a note that read, "About time someone stood up to her." Another man, Rick, emailed me screenshots from a private HOA Facebook group, showing Karen ranting about my boat being an eyesore and accusing me of plotting to dismantle the HOA from within. It was almost laughable how off the rails she had gone. Still, I didn't take it lightly. Angela advised me to document everything, so I did. Every email, every letter, every HOA communication was stored in a growing digital folder titled Karen's Collapse. And then came the kicker. Karen filed a countersuit claiming adverse possession of the clubhouse, land, and dock. Her argument? That the HOA had been using the land openly and notoriously for over 20 years, and thus had a legal right to claim it. Angela burst out laughing when she read the filing. "This is desperation," she said. "No way a court's going to hand over private property just because they've been squatting on it." But it did mean one thing. We were headed to court. Court meant discovery. That was where things got really interesting. Through subpoenas and disclosures, we uncovered a trove of HOA records that Karen probably never intended to see the light of day. Internal memos discussing how the original developers had failed to secure easements for the lakefront properties, emails between past board members warning that the clubhouse sat on private land, and even one damning document from 2005 where a board president explicitly wrote, "If the Bell family ever pushes this, we'll have to deal with it legally." That was the smoking gun they had known for years. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was covering up negligence. When we presented this to the judge during the preliminary hearing, the color drained from the HOA lawyer's face. Karen, sitting in the gallery, looked like she had swallowed a lemon whole. The judge ruled that our lawsuit would proceed with priority status and urged both sides to seek settlement before it escalated into full trial. That night I got a knock at the door. Karen, alone. No clipboard, no entourage. You're just her in a cardigan, holding a manila envelope. "I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot," she said, forcing a smile. "I'd like to propose a compromise." I didn't invite her in. I stood on the porch, arms crossed. "Go ahead." She offered to drop the HOA complaint and waive all fines if I agreed to gift the clubhouse land to the association. "You wouldn't even have to do anything," she said. "Just sign a simple transfer form. We take care of the maintenance, and you could keep your boat." The audacity was breathtaking. I took the envelope and flipped through a tan amateur legal form printed off the internet and pre-filled with my name. "Karen," I said quietly, "you built a clubhouse on land you didn't own, enforced rules you had no right to enforce, and fined me for using my own property. You're not getting a compromise. You're getting a consequence." I handed the envelope back and shut the door. The next morning, HOA signs began disappearing from around the clubhouse. I found out later that Rick and 2 other board members had resigned overnight. One even sent me a private message. We didn't know. She lied to us too. Karen still had her supporters, the diehards, the control freaks who thrived under her rule. They began a smear campaign, sending anonymous letters to my employer, posting on local message boards, even claiming I had doctored the deed. One even accused me of forging my uncle's signature posthumously, which triggered a short investigation by the county only for it to be dropped within 48 hours when they confirmed everything was legitimate. Karen was grasping at straws, and everyone could see it. Meanwhile, my case gained attention. Local newspaper ran a piece titled, "Boat Owner Fights Back Against HOA Tyranny." And soon after, I was invited to speak on a small community radio show. I kept things factual, calm, focused on the documents and the principle, not personal attacks, and it worked. Emails flooded in from nearby neighborhoods thanking me for standing up. Other homeowners began sharing similar stories: garbage fines, holiday decoration restrictions, even backyard tree removals. One woman said she had been fined $500 for leaving her kayak on her own deck. Karen may have started this war thinking it would be quick, but now she was facing a rebellion. The legal process dragged into the fall, but our side only grew stronger. Angela pushed for a full injunction on HOA access to any part of my land, and it was granted. The community dock was roped off. The clubhouse was shuttered. Karen tried to rally the residents, claiming I was destroying the community's way of life. But the truth was, people were starting to see who had really betrayed them. Without access to the lake, their events stopped. Without the clubhouse, meetings dwindled. And with every legal win I secured, more and more homeowners began questioning how much authority the HOA really had. It wasn't just about my boat anymore. It was about exposing a system built on arrogance, secrecy, and the assumption that no one would ever fight back. And now, as the trial date approached and depositions were scheduled, Karen's carefully curated empire stood on the verge of collapse. She had no idea just how far I was willing to go, and no clue what final surprise I still had in store for her. As the court date loomed, the tension in Lakeside Ridge reached a boiling point. And while Karen clung to what little influence she had left, it was clear the tide had turned against her. The once tightly controlled HOA had splintered half. The board resigned, community events ceased. A quiet murmur spread through the neighborhood that maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong to trust her unconditionally. I stayed focused. Angela had prepared a meticulous legal strategy. Together we spent long evenings reviewing every document, map, correspondence, and legal precedent we could find. Karen, meanwhile, had switched attorneys for the 3rd time in as many months likely, because her prior ones kept discovering how little ground she actually had to stand on. Her current legal counsel, a sharp-looking man with slick hair and a tone that oozed arrogance, requested mediation just days before the trial. Angela agreed, if only to expose how desperate they had become. We met in a neutral office space downtown. Karen walked in wearing a designer suit and large sunglasses like she was testifying before Congress, while I wore jeans and a button-down, my demeanor calm but firm. Her lawyer opened by offering what he called a generous concession. The HOA would withdraw all fines and apologize in writing if I agreed to sell them the land beneath the clubhouse for $1. I actually laughed out loud. Angela didn't even blink. Counteroffer, she said. Immediate removal of all HOA structures from the plaintiff's land, a public admission of trespass and payment for back damages, including legal fees. Or we proceed to court, where we'll also file for fraud, punitive damages, and forced dissolution of the HOA due to misrepresentation of property ownership. The silence that followed was so heavy it was almost satisfying. Karen looked like she'd been slapped. Her lawyer stammered something about absurd overreach. But Angela calmly opened a folder and slid a copy of the 2005 board email across the table. The one where they admitted the land wasn't theirs. You knew, she said quietly. And you lied to your entire community for years. The meeting ended abruptly. They refused the offer, of course. Karen couldn't bear the humiliation of admitting she was wrong, let alone publicly. And so, the court battle began in earnest. Opening arguments were broadcast live on the county access channel, and to my surprise, dozens of neighbors showed up to watch in person. The courtroom was packed, standing room only, as Angela walked the judge through decades of property maps, deed records, and HOA meeting transcripts. She outlined how the HOA had knowingly built on land they didn't own, enforced rules over territory outside their jurisdiction, and attempted to silence the one person who finally challenged them. Karen's defense was flimsy at best. Her attorney argued that decades of use constituted ownership, a concept the judge quickly shot down, reminding the courtroom that use without permission is not ownership, it's trespass. When Angela presented photographic evidence of the original boundary stakes still partially buried in the ground behind the clubhouse, it sealed the deal. Even more damning was the financial audit we had subpoenaed, which showed the HOA had spent over $90,000 in community funds on renovations to the clubhouse and dock over the last 5 years, money they had no legal right to invest on private property. The look on Karen's face was priceless when that exhibit went up on the big screen. For the first time, she didn't look furious, she looked scared. Then came the bombshell. One of the former board members, who had resigned, recoded to testify under oath. He admitted that Karen had deliberately withheld documentation showing the land dispute when she applied for permits and wrote HOA bylaws. He said she told the board not to worry, that Thomas wouldn't care, and if he did, he'd never take on the HOA. That quote alone caused a stir in the gallery. The judge raised his eyebrows, asked for it to be read again, and quietly made a note. When Karen took the stand, she was defensive, combative, constantly trying to shift blame or change the subject. Angela was relentless, keeping her answers pinned to the facts. Did you or did you not authorize community funds to be used on a structure built on private property without an easement? Karen dodged. I acted in good faith. That wasn't the question. Karen deflected again. The judge finally interrupted, demanding a direct answer. Yes, she finally admitted. But I believed it was in the best interest of the community, even when you knew it wasn't your land. Angela asked. I wasn't sure, Karen muttered. I was told you were told in 2005, Angela cut in, holding up the printed email. Is that your name on the memo? Karen didn't reply. She didn't need to. The damage was done. By the end of the third day of testimony, the mood in the courtroom had shifted entirely.
Oh.
People began to murmur in support. Reporters took notes furiously. Even the HOA loyalists who had once shouted at me from their porches now sat silently in the back row, unable to defend what was unfolding. Closing arguments were brief. Angela summarized the entire ordeal as a cautionary tale of power without oversight, and reminded the judge that beyond the legal violations, the emotional toll and intimidation had been profound. Karen's lawyer offered no new defense, only a weak plea that the HOA be allowed to resolve this internally through its own governing structures. The judge promised a decision within 2 weeks. I walked out of that courtroom into a cool breeze and the smell of pine needles on the air. Neighbors approached me quietly at first, then more boldly. Thank you, one said. We didn't know. Another shook my hand. Had us all fooled, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Back at the cabin, I poured a glass of bourbon and walked down to the dock, where the Chris Craft rocked gently in the evening light. Max sat beside me, tail thumping. I looked out at the lake my uncle loved, the lake I had inherited, protected, and finally defended. Karen thought she could push me off this land. She thought she could write a letter, issue a fine, and I'd fold like all the others. But what she never understood was that this wasn't just property, it was legacy, it was principle, and it was mine. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I knew one thing for sure when that ruling came down. Nothing in Lakeside Ridge would ever be the same again. 2 weeks after the final courtroom arguments, a single envelope arrived in the mail that would change everything in Lakeside. Ridge, the county court seal stamped in blue ink at the top, gave it an official gravity, but I didn't need to open it to know what it said. I had felt it in the silence of the courtroom, the way the judge had stared at Karen during closing statements with tired eyes and clenched fingers. I opened the envelope slowly, methodically, like peeling back the cover of a long-awaited book. Inside was a signed court order, thick with detail but sharp in tone. The verdict: full acknowledgement of my private ownership of the lake and the surrounding properties, a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from accessing or developing any part of the land without express written consent, and a 30-day deadline for the HOA to remove all structures built on my land, including the clubhouse, dock, and associated amenities. Additionally, the HOA was ordered to pay damages for trespass, legal fees, and emotional distress, totaling just over $138,000. But the true blow came at the end: a judicial recommendation that the HOA be dissolved and restructured under independent oversight due to willful misconduct by leadership. Karen had lost, not just legally, entirely. That same afternoon, Angela and I drove to the Lakeside Ridge Clubhouse, where Karen and a small gathering of her remaining loyalists had called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but the court order gave me every right to be there. I walked in, papers in hand, and stood at the front of the room while Angela passed out printed copies of the ruling. The murmurs began before I even spoke. Karen sat in a folding chair at the front, arms crossed tightly, lips pressed into a thin line. "This," I said, holding up the ruling, "is the legal reality. The lake, the dock, the clubhouse, you've all been using land that doesn't belong to you, and now it's time to take it back." Someone in the crowd, a middle-aged man with gray at his temples, stood up. "Is it true?" he asked Karen. "Did you know all along?" Karen didn't answer. She stared straight ahead, unmoving. "Did you lie to us?" another neighbor asked. "Did you use our dues to pay for renovations on land we don't even own?" someone shouted. "I want my money back." And just like that, the dam broke. Shouts turned into a frenzy of questions, accusations, and disbelief. Karen stood abruptly and raised her hand like a schoolteacher trying to restore order, but no one listened. One man slammed his HOA binder onto the table and walked out. Others followed. In less than 10 minutes, the room cleared out, leaving Karen alone at the front, red-faced and shaking. I stood there, watching Hertha woman, who had sent me fines, threats, and legal threats, now cornered by her own web of control. She tried to speak, but choked on her own words. "Forward. You have 30 days to remove all structures and vacate the land. After that, we'll take possession of the clubhouse and charge you rent retroactively. You may want to call a moving company." Karen looked like she wanted to scream, but instead she turned away, gathered her things, and walked out without a word. That night, I returned to my dock and cracked a beer, watching the lake shimmer under the stars. Max lay beside me, his tail thumping lazily. The wind moved through the trees in a way that felt cleansing. The past year had been a war, zone of letters, threats, courtrooms, and lies, but now it was quiet, peaceful, real. Over the next few weeks, the HOA slowly unraveled. The board disbanded entirely within the month. An independent audit revealed massive budget discrepancies. Kieran had authorized unapproved spending on landscaping contracts, security systems, and legal expenses. A class action lawsuit was filed by multiple homeowners, citing mismanagement and fraud. Karen's name was stripped from every HOA document, and she quietly listed her home for sale just before winter hit. No one threw her a goodbye party. No one bought her cookies. No one even said her name anymore. Clubhouse was dismantled under court supervision. I donated the building materials to a local veterans group that built cabins for homeless service members. As for the dock, I reclaimed it, restored the aging wood, and expanded it into a beautiful lakeside platform with chairs, fishing rails, and solar lanterns. It became my new favorite place to read, reflect, and think.
Ow.
Sometimes neighbors would paddle over in kayaks or canoes, asking for permission to dock for a few minutes. I always said yes. I never held it against them. Most of them had been misled just like I had been ambushed. One woman, Sarah, stopped by with her son and a plate of brownies. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. You reminded us that the HOA doesn't own us. That one sentence stayed with me for days. It wasn't just about property lines or lawsuits anymore. It was about ownership in a deeper sense. The ownership of peace, of boundaries, of our right to live freely without fear of a clipboard-wielding tyrant screaming about flower colors and boat sizes. I had taken my land back, yes, but more importantly, I had taken back control from a system that had gone unchecked for far too long. By winter, Lakeside Ridge felt like a new place. Without Karen's enforcement squads stalking through yards and snapping pictures of minor violations, people started putting out decorations again. One man installed a little windmill in his backyard. A family built a treehouse. A retired couple planted sunflowers in a non-approved garden bed, and everyone loved it. No one asked for permission anymore. They didn't need to. And as the first snow began to fall, I stood on the dock with Max, looking over the frozen lake, knowing that we had not only won a legal battle, we had broken the spell of fear that held this neighborhood hostage for far too long. There was still one chapter left to close, and I was ready for it. Karen's empire was gone. Her lies had been exposed. But the final blow, the one that would cement her legacy in HOA infamy, was still waiting to be delivered. And I had just the plan. Asterisk. The final chapter came not in a courtroom or a neighborhood meeting, but in a real estate office on the edge of town, where Karen, unaware that I had followed every step of her exit strategy, was trying to unload her house as quietly as possible. To a couple relocating from out of state, I had been notified by the escrow agent, a friend of Angela's, who flagged me the moment. Karen attempted to list her property without disclosing the lawsuits, the fraud investigation, or the fact that she had used HOA funds to improve a clubhouse built illegally on private land. The buyers, a kind retired couple from Oregon, were set to sign within days when I stepped in with a formal disclosure request. Legally, any seller must reveal pending litigation or material neighborhood disputes, especially those involving properties built on contested land. Karen had disclosed none of it. I provided the court rulings, the financial audits, and a summary of the fraud claims still pending against her. The buyers backed out immediately. She found out it was me who had stopped the sale, she finally cracked. A series of unhinged social media posts followed, ranting about conspiracies, claiming I was a land thief, a liar, even suggesting I had hacked into HOA servers to forge documents. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The legal system had already spoken. Her online rants only made her look more unstable to the community she had once ruled. She tried to relist the house 3 more times each time. The buyer's agent pulled out after doing due diligence. The property became a symbol of toxic leadership, a cautionary tale whispered about in local real estate circles. Eventually it sat vacant, weather-worn, forgotten, and then, in a poetic turn of fate, the property went into foreclosure. Unable to sell, and with legal bills stacking up, Karen's world collapsed. No one bailed her out. Not a single neighbor came to her defense. She packed her SUV and drove out of Lakeside Ridge one gray morning. The same way she had ruled it silently with bitterness and blind arrogance. But I wasn't done. You see, after the HOA dissolved and the land was legally restored to me, I had full authority over the lake, the shoreline, and the once contested clubhouse zone. Most people expected me to build a fence, put up no trespassing signs, maybe even block the lake from neighborhood access entirely. But I didn't. Instead, I turned it into a community haven free of any governing board, open to respectful use. I hosted a summer barbecue on the dock. Dozens came. The man who once stopped, waving at me, brought beer and apologized. A teenager who had once egged my mailbox volunteered to mow the grass around the dock. Without Karen's iron grip, the neighborhood became real, imperfect, alive, and finally human. That fall, Angela and I sat on the rebuilt clubhouse porch now, a community tool shed and library, and watched as kids paddled canoes across the water and parents chatted over lemonade. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. That's all anyone had ever wanted. Later that winter, I received one last letter from a law firm representing a national HOA consulting group. They had been following the case and wanted to know if I'd consider speaking at a housing reform summit in D.C. I agreed. I told my story in front of 300 HOA board members, real estate attorneys, and community planners. When I showed them the original letter Karen sent, the one demanding I remove my boat, they laughed at first. Then they listened. Really listened. Because what had happened in Lakeside Ridge wasn't isolated. It was everywhere. It's a false sense of absolute authority, the unchecked power of Karen's hiding behind bylaws and bogus fines. The manipulation of good neighbors into silent followers. It was a pattern, a dangerous one. My message was simple. Property ownership isn't just a title, it's a responsibility and a right. And no board, no Karen, no clipboard can take that away without a fight. When I returned home, I found a hand-painted sign someone had left on my dock. It read, "Thanks for standing up. You saved this place." And maybe that's the real story here. Not just of a man who owned a lake, but of what happens when one voice refuses to be silenced. Karen believed no one would stand up to her. She counted on silence, on fear, on compliance. But in the end, it wasn't lawyers or paperwork that beat her. It was truth. It was persistence. It was the refusal to back down when it mattered most. If you've ever felt powerless against an unjust HOA, if you've been bullied, fined, or threatened for simply living your life peacefully, know this: you are not alone, and you don't have to stay silent. Fight back. Tell your story. And most importantly, never let someone like Karen control your life with fear. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something you've faced, or inspired you to reclaim your own voice, then do one thing right now. Subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel. We're here to tell the stories that fight back, expose the truth, and make sure no one faces a Karen alone again. Click subscribe, join the community, and let's take the power back one story at a time.